So if you'd asked me on January the 7th, should he run again? No. Trump slowly but surely got himself back to a place where right now I would say he's favourite to win the election. If he wins it, it's the greatest comeback in political history.
Piers Morgan, thanks so much for coming on Press Club.
It's great to be in your lair. I haven't been here. It's very impressive.
What do you think? You like our studio?
I like your studio very much, yeah.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
What brings you to New York?
I don't know. You've got some weird event going on. Is it the election?
We do have the election going on.
Yeah, look, as you know, I do this Piers Morgan Uncensored YouTube stuff has been flying recently, and a lot of that's down to our coverage of the elections. I think I had to be here to just get the feel for what's really going on. And of course, a lot of the key people who you want to have on the show, they're all here. Everyone's around, they're all here. The energy's up, the excitement, the tension, you can feel it in the streets. It's fascinating.
Now, I do want to ask about the show. Has the election been a really big driver of audience for you? Because I know your most viewed video, I think, is the interview with Bassem.
Yeah, I'd say two things in the last year would be the Israel-Hamas war and the US presidential election. They've been the two big things. Although the other story I would say that has surprised me by the scale of interest has been the P. Diddy scandal.
Right.
So in a way, you see a sort of microcosm there of where I think we sit as a channel, which is people will come to us for war, for politics, and for celebrity culture, albeit serious scandal, celebrity culture. Yeah. And that's where I want us to be, where you can have viewers come and they're interested in all those things.
Where do you go in New York? I know you used to live here. When you visit again.
What you mean to?
Yeah, where do you eat? What do you like to do?
I mean, the Ralph Lauren Polo Bar is my go-to for a
solid spot.
A lovely steak. I like the prawn shrimps, you would call them, and the ones that steam when they arrive, and a nice massive steak. I like that. I like Elio's up on the Upper East.
Nice.
Love that. Orsay, little French place again, Upper East. I really like.
Yep.
I've got a few Irish bars. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I lived here on and off for a few years, so I love New York.
I was going to say those are favorites among journalists and cable news
I
stars.
like bumping into other media types.
Yeah, why not?
That's why we gravitate to those places.
Now, let's talk about the election and Trump. I want to first get your take on the big story this week, which was his rally at Madison Square Garden. It caused a lot of controversy. What did you make of it? You were there. We were
first
both there.
rally I've ever been to.
Really?
For any politician.
It was the first rally I've ever been to as well for
really?
Trump. Yeah, for Trump at least.
I've not been to anyone's rally, but I happened to be in New York. And
Trump for first political rally of all time is an interesting, really throwing in the deep end there.
Well, it's interesting because I wrote a column about him for the New York Post a few months ago, and I compared him to Mick Jagger. I said that he's basically the front man of a rock band. And that's exactly what happened. And of course, it was ironic that the first time I see him, he's at Madison Square Garden, where the Stones have played. Everyone's played Madison Square Garden. It's where Marilyn sang "Happy Birthday to Mr. President." The Pope has been there. Muhammad Ali fought there. So for Trump, this has been a genuine dream. But for me, having compared him to Jagger, here I'm watching this political rock star. Whether you love him or hate him, he's a rock star. And he's performing like a front man of a band. It was like being at a 6-hour rolling festival.
Yes.
Where he's the headline act, and before that you get all the warm-up acts. The crowd they're there for the fervor, the energy. They're there for the warm-up acts, but then they want the main event, and then they want to go and buy all the merchandise. It's like being at a rock concert.
What did you make of the criticism that the rally got? There were obviously the warm-up acts got criticism for off-color jokes. Some racist jokes, some comments that were pretty extreme. Kamala Harris got compared to the Antichrist. Trump himself really hammered the immigration issue in a way that a lot of people find quite extreme. And the Harris campaign is obviously hammering that this week. What did you make of that?
Well, I think the Tony Hinchcliffe scandal was interesting because, I watched the Tom Brady roast in which he says far worse things.
Stuff,
and nobody seemed to mind. So he was incredibly racist in that. And you think, well, okay, so nobody cared that he was doing that at a Tom Brady roast. So it was more the environment that he was operating. Hinchcliffe does that. He's a roaster. And it was just interesting to me that it's not even a double standard. If you're going to unleash him at a political rally like that, you're going to have to expect blowback when he says stuff which is blatantly racist, which he did. So I thought it was a mistake to book him, actually, for a political rally, because what's happened is all the attention gleefully seized by the Democrats, as the Republicans have done the other way around, has been on what he said about Puerto Rico. All I would say, go and watch this guy. Jon Stewart did a brilliant piece on Monday night about this. If you go and watch the roast of Tom Brady, the number one most offensive guy there, including a lot of racist stuff, is Tony Hinchcliffe.
Yeah.
That's what he does.
Right.
And I think that you know what he does, so who booked him? And why did they not think that was going to be probably deliberately taken and used as a battering ram against you? So I thought it was a bad decision to have him there, but I don't particularly blame Hinchcliffe because that's what he does.
That's what he does. Yeah, it's funny. I occasionally his Kill Tony show, which is this live show that he does in Austin, appears on my Instagram feed, and it's probably the most extreme, controversial comedy that is out there and that is popular. And so I guess maybe they thought he would moderate for the crowd. Not the smartest idea.
All I knew, I didn't hear exactly what he said, but I saw the crowd reaction because he was one of the first. I think he was the first guy out, and they just didn't find it funny.
They didn't find it funny.
They were like, "Why is this guy saying this stuff about Puerto Rico?" Tony Hinchcliffe fans would have laughed.
Yeah, right.
Jon Stewart went, I'm sorry, this guy's funny.
I get it. Yeah.
But that's in a roast environment. I think the problem was wrong guy for the wrong event. Don't blame Hinchcliffe because that's what he does and everyone knows that. And we all found him hilarious in the Tom Brady roast, but somehow he can't be funny doing the same stuff here. I think it was a bit of hot air about nothing. Yeah. But I don't blame the Democrats. I think the Republicans would have done exactly the same to them.
Now, part of the closing message from the Harris campaign is stuff like that. They're seizing upon. There's also this notion that Trump is authoritarian. And last time we spoke, you were on the show a couple months back, and you said there's a touch of authoritarianism in Trump's rhetoric and his actions, but you said you think his bark is bigger than his bite.
Yeah.
You expressed hope that would be the case.
Yeah.
You weren't certain that, necessarily in a second Trump term it would be all bark, no bite. Has your view changed on that? Because this has been a big issue this campaign for voters about whether or not a second Trump term, which Democrats say would be a horrifying disaster. Whoopi Goldberg would be in a camp by the end of February. Republicans dismiss that as ridiculous, over the top. We already had Trump in for 4 years. He wasn't that bad.
Yeah.
I think you could point to a couple things that he did during his first term that were alarming.
But you could also point to things where he was absolutely right. And that's the thing about Trump is you have to take the bark from the bite and treat them slightly separately.
Okay.
I think with Trump, I've known him nearly 20 years.
Yeah.
And I know him very well. I spoke to him the other day. I've spoken to him a few times this year. I know him very well. He'll say a lot of inflammatory stuff to get headlines. I would focus more on what he actually does. And if you look at the vast amount of his first tenure, if you actually take the tweeting and the rhetoric generally out of the equation, focus purely on his actions, he was a reasonably moderate Republican president. People don't want to admit that. And I would say to Democrats, look, you keep calling him a new Hitler. Hitler murdered 12 million people. He perpetrated a Holocaust on the Jewish people. He was an absolute genocidal maniac. If he's really the new Hitler, when he came to Madison Square Garden on Sunday to do a rally in Democrat heartland, why did only 150 of you turn up to protest? Where were the hordes from 2016 when we were told then he was a new Hitler, but then he didn't actually turn out to be the new Hitler? So now they're calling him the new Hitler again because he didn't have any other game plan against him. But if he's that dangerous, if he's the new Adolf Hitler, where were they all when he marched into the middle of Manhattan and did this massive rally at Madison Square Garden? So I'm afraid I think it's incredibly disingenuous. All this, he's a fascist, he's this, he's a Nazi. He's a Nazi but had a Holocaust survivor sitting in the rally. His son-in-law is Jewish. His daughter converted to Judaism when she married Jared. He's been one of Israel's biggest supporters. It's not the most convincing Nazi rally I've seen.
Now, I want to put aside the comparisons of Trump to Hitler because I agree they're obviously ridiculous. The thing that I think his defenders are using that as a way to circumvent is the fact that, and this is, I would say, probably the most potent argument against the second Trump term, a considerable amount of people that served in his administration, including General John Kelly, decorated 4-star general, served as his DHS Secretary and Chief of Staff, is by no means a flaming liberal, very conservative. People like him, people like Mark Milley, Jim Mattis, all say that Trump is dangerous, that he should not be elected president again, that would be very bad for the country. And General John Kelly said that he expressed admiration for Hitler, which is why we have a news cycle about Hitler now. And there are comparisons between Trump and Hitler. But General John Kelly said that he admired him privately. Is that a red flag for you? Do you see that as a
I think a lot of people who used to work for Trump, who took the job knowing what he was reputed to be like. I think people that do that, and then when he behaves how they were told he might behave, then go, oh my God, he's a fascist. I had no idea.
Isn't that behavior alarming, though, to begin with?
It is if you genuinely think he's a fascist. It's like,
Right.
it's like, do I think he's a fascist? No, I don't.
Okay.
Do I think he's a neo-Nazi? No, I don't. Do I think he's racist? Not in my experience.
Yeah.
And I've had a lot of time around Trump. I've never heard him be racist.
So do you think John
private,
Kelly...
which races are, by the way, in private. So
Right.
it's not like I want to be his big... When I was a columnist at the Daily Mail, in his first term in office, I wrote 120 columns about Trump. Half of them were positive and half were negative. Some of them incredibly scathing. And that kind of seemed to me a more accurate reflection of his term in office. We've got to with Trump where there's very little middle ground. There are very few people like me who can say, well, that was good and that was terrible. That was great and that was awful. And yet that is the way I think to best handle Trump. He's going to do stuff that's going to drive you nuts. He's going to say things which are awful. When he attacked John McCain after he died, or Colin Powell after he died, I winced. It's like, why would you do that? Why would you do that? But trying to say to Donald Trump at 78, change. He's not going to change.
Not going to change.
He's always been a very bombastic, aggressive kind of character. If you read his book, The Art of the Deal, it's all in there, the whole template for how he is. So when I did Celebrity Apprentice, I read that book 3 times so I could get inside his head. It's probably why I won that first series and season of it. And I said I basically did stuff I knew he'd like. But I understood what I was dealing with. And I think too often people either because they don't really understand him, or because they do understand him but want to pretend he's worse than he is, they whip themselves into this lather about Trump. I mean, he literally has a unique ability to drive liberals to complete and utter distraction. They can't even think straight. I don't see him like that. I see him as somebody who's I mean, the best description I had of Trump, my daughter's 12 years old, and she said to me recently that she'd heard me say that Trump's a unique character. And she said, Dada, there is such a thing as being too unique. And I thought that was a good description. If anything, Trump's a bit too unique.
A little too unique.
But I just don't see him as this existential threat to democracy or to America.
But then how would you explain when you see those comments from John Kelly and Milley and Mattis?
I think, honestly, they all want to sell books. They all want to make money. They all want to have a bit of...
But Kelly's done it pretty subtly. There's no book.
I know. Yeah. Listen, I'm not disputing that that's what they think went down and they've got their views or whatever. But there are lots of people that were in the rooms with people like Kelly and others who dispute what they say, and Trump denies it. I don't know. Yeah. Does Trump say stuff off the cuff which doesn't look well in print? Of course. It's not the most surprising thing in the world. But my question for people is, do you really think he is capable of murdering 12 million people? Because actually, when he was the president of the United States, he didn't declare war on anyone. He actually took out a leader of ISIS. He forged interesting relationships with leaders like Putin and President Xi and Kim Jong-un. He did some stuff like NATO with the funding, which I thought was incredibly effective in a very Trump-like way, which is, if you want America to stump up the most cash for this organization and always be there if you get attacked, you better pay what you're supposed to pay. And guess what? They're all now paying it. And so I think he's a blunt instrument, but sometimes that can be quite effective. Now, he does other stuff which drives me nuts. I thought the whole January 6th thing was awful, appalling, and was very scathing about him at the time. I thought some of his stuff in the pandemic was ridiculous, talking about injecting yourself with bleach and so on. So I'm not afraid to criticize Trump at all. But I do think the hysteria about him is massively overblown.
Those things, and I want to get to your relationship with Trump in a second, but you previously pointed to January 6th, his denial about the 2020 election, his handling of COVID as major issues that you had with him. And you pressed him about those in an interview a couple years ago. A lot of people find those disqualifying. A lot of people find his attempt to overturn the 2020 election, January 6th as a result, is he should never be in office again. Do you think those are disqualifying for an American president?
I did it in the moment because it all looked so horrific.
Right.
I have to say, since that time, I've watched all the arguments play out. And you could certainly construct an argument that, when Hillary Clinton lost, everyone said, well, it was stolen, right? Sure. She didn't legitimately lose, blah, 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 blah. There's always a bit of that goes on after every election result. We haven't seen the scene that we saw at the Capitol. It was grotesque and awful. Just how complicit Trump personally was in that remains to be tested in a court. I did not like any of it. In fact, I remember messaging in the middle of it one of his people saying, for God's sake, tell him to stop this. And I think he did very soon after, not because of me, because he was going to do it anyway. But I think he belatedly realised what was happening and then realised how awful it was. But it was an awful day for America, an awful day for democracy. But I thought at the moment, he's done. There's no way back from this.
Yeah,
but
I think everyone did.
But some of the things that I admire most about Trump are his durability, his resilience, his personal strength. We saw all that when he got shot.
Yeah.
You know, when he got shot, to get back up, when not even knowing there's another shooter around, and start punching the air, to go back on a rally stage a week later, that shows me he's got, balls of steel. And I like those qualities in a leader. So Trump slowly but surely got himself back to a place where right now I would say he's favourite to win the election. If he wins it, it's the greatest comeback in political history. It is the Tiger Woods winning the Masters again in 2019 of politics. And you can't help but admire the strength of character which has allowed him to come from that place where not just me, but a lot of people. I interviewed Kevin McCarthy today. He was heard on tape at the time saying he's done.
Yeah.
That was the general perceived wisdom. He was finished.
Yeah.
There was no way back from this. And yet here he is, the favourite to be president again. It's an astonishing arc. So was it disqualifying? I did feel that in the moment.
Yeah.
I don't feel that now.
Really? But do you think that that's based on a changing moral standard? Or
I think, look, I have a pretty dim view of politics and morality generally. Okay. I think they're all pretty power crazed, and I think they're all susceptible to moments of madness, if I'm honest with you. I think that Trump's trump card, if you like, the plus and negative of being Trump, is that a lot of the quality, I always say he has the thinnest skin in the world, of anyone I know. He reacts to the slightest perceived insult by going to DEFCON 1 immediately. However, he also has the thickest skin in the world. He soaks up stuff that would kill any other politician. And that's an admirable quality for a politician. And it's an admirable quality for the leader of the free world on the world stage. There's no doubt. I've been around Trump. I was in Davos when he first became president, watching other world leaders congregate. Nobody really gave them much attention. When Trump arrived, it was literally unbelievable. It was mayhem. Everyone going crazy. He's by far the biggest figure in global politics.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily a bad thing for America. I think people have kind of factored in what they think of Trump now.
Yeah.
So if you'd asked me on January the 7th, should he run again? No, as he pointed out when I interviewed him last time, because I'd said that. And he said, you said I shouldn't. Yeah, I did. But I also think you can change your mind. And the interesting question now is not what I think of whether he should become president. It's down to the American people. I can't vote. It's not my country. I'm very happy to come here a lot, and I've got a place here. But it's down to the American people. If they determine that Trump is going to do a better job than Kamala Harris, and I can quite understand why a lot of them would think that, because I think she's a pretty useless candidate, then that's on the American people.
You had a falling out with Trump, I think after your last interview with him in 2022. And you guys didn't speak for a while, and then he called you out of the blue back in June. You had a good piece in The Spectator that I was reading about that. And it sounds like you've been speaking with him more regularly now. Yeah. You guys are back on good terms.
He called me on Sunday. I texted him to say I was going to go to the rally. And he called me like 30 seconds later. We had a fun chat about it. And I knew what it meant to, because he is a New Yorker. And if you're a New Yorker, Madison Square Garden, you got to perform there. You got to headline at Madison Square Garden. This was a big deal for him. But he was very confident. And people always ask me, what do you think he'd be second time round? I think you would see a different Trump, because he would know then he's not going to try and get re-elected, because he can't. And I think also, look, he is a narcissist. He is a big egotist. He will want to have a better legacy than the one that he left the first term of office with, which was at that moment disastrous. Yeah. He will want to have a better legacy. It will play to his ego to do that. And I think I would not be surprised if you see a slightly different style of Trump second time round. Now, I might be completely deluded, and he might just, make me look an idiot when you play this back in a couple of years. But I get a feeling that this time round, because he knows that this is the last time he can run, he won't be in running mode. He'll be in legacy mode. And you might see a different and better Trump.
The common wisdom, I would say, is probably a little more pessimistic on that regard, because the feeling is that he would be more unbridled, and that he would do a lot of the things that his aides stopped him from doing in his first term, which people perceive as illiberal.
I think the checks and balances in the American system are very strong. They're very robust. I mean, people talk about him, as I said to his face, you did not have the election stolen from you. And he went nuts and called me a fool and so on. And then issued 4 presidential statements of increasing ferocity, including Piers Morgan so dead he's catching flies, I think was my favourite. But then, like with all these things, 6 months later, we're, hey,
Totally fine
how
again.
are
Yeah.
you? But I just felt like he didn't have the election solved for that. But I said to him, if you'd argued about the Hunter Biden laptop as a reason why that may have cost you election, I'm with you.
Right.
100%. You're just fighting the wrong stolen election argument because there's no evidence that you produced. And so he won't hear it, and everyone knows he won't hear it. But it was interesting to me to have that debate face to face with him. He needs to move on now. He needs to move on to the next phase of it.
Yeah. I want to talk about your show. You left Talk TV, which was a linear network.
Well, we ended Talk TV basically.
Ended Talk TV.
I came off it first, and then a few months later,
right, it shuttered.
We shut down the linear version.
Yeah.
But the main reason was that our YouTube channel running concurrently with the same material was just doing gangbuster numbers.
Yeah.
And so it made no sense to me.
And just to give viewers a sense of what Talk TV was, to put it sort of briefly and crudely, it was Rupert Murdoch's attempt to launch a news network in the UK, sort of in the same vein as Fox News.
Yeah, although I'm not a conservative.
Right. But your show, I think it was such a fascinating story when you left Talk TV to do purely on YouTube, because you're really at the vanguard of something that's going to happen for the next decade, which is people leaving linear television as it gets smaller and smaller. You were hosting a nightly show, I think it was.
Yeah.
You were showing up on a schedule every night to host a show in front of a quite small audience because it was a new network. And then you were getting millions and millions of views on YouTube.
Yeah.
So you left, went where the audience is, and where the audience is going to be.
I'll just give you one example of why. I interviewed Bassem Youssef, the Egyptian Jon Stewart. On Talk Television Linear, we got about 80,000 people watching. On our YouTube channel, same interview, exactly the same, just put on the YouTube channel, 22 million.
Huge.
And that was the moment when I went, okay, we need to pivot because it's very expensive to do linear television. Why are we spending all this money to produce a version of this content which has got a minimal audience out there and probably never going to be that big? But at the same time, we've got this phenomenal thing on our YouTube channel, and we saw it with Cristiano Ronaldo interviewing Kanye and Donald Trump and others. It just made much more sense. I've got 3 sons in there, like 31, 27, 23. They don't watch linear TV.
No.
Other than live sport, they watch YouTube. My daughter's nearly 13. She watches YouTube. And they're all like, Dad, why are you doing this? This is like the dinosaurs. And I agreed.
You had a quote in a story, I think, when you were promoting the new YouTube show, and you noted that 10% of American audiences 10% of their time watching television is watching YouTube on their TV app, which is astonishing.
Yeah.
And it proves, and particularly because YouTube is actually lucrative, you can make money on YouTube.
Yes.
And so the fact that so many people are watching there, and that number is only going to grow, I suspect, that makes it, it makes a lot of sense to move over to YouTube. Was there hesitation jumping over, or did this just make the most sense?
Not
for
really.
you?
It just looked to me like you got parallel lines going with the same content. And the costs were far more prohibitive for the linear version than for YouTube. And you can be much more nimble. I don't have to trudge into a studio at 8 o'clock each night to do a live show, where often I was cutting short interviews. I really wanted to go long. And I was looking at people like Joe Rogan and thinking, well, that's what I want to do, really, where you just go as long as you want. Yeah. And that's what I do now. And I much prefer that freedom. And also, I just prefer it's interesting. I said something the other day. I've done a lot of big things. America's Got Talent. Britain's Got Talent. Celebrity Apprentice. I won it. CNN for 4 years, replacing Larry King. I've done a lot. Good Morning Britain, and Britain was the #1 breakfast show by then. I've done all these big, conventional things. And I've had a level of recognition for all of them quite high, right? A lot of them have aired in many, many countries. Nothing has compared to the YouTube attention I've been getting.
Yeah.
Just walking around New York in the last few days, a number of people coming up who are watching it, and they're really into it. And that shows me it's the right decision. And they're younger.
And that's the thing. I feel like there's a huge divide between. I wrote a story for The Spectator actually a couple months ago about Patrick Bet-David, who's huge on YouTube. And I would tell people over the age of 40, 50 about Patrick Bet-David. They had no idea who he was. No. Tell anyone under the age of 40, and they look at me like, of course I know who that is. This is John Lennon, basically. Yeah. And so the audience is distinct, but it's the future audience. Yes. So it's definitely something that's going to grow. Yeah. You cut your teeth in the British tabloids. Do you feel like they're similar mediums, the tabloids and YouTube? Because it's the same kind of headlines. They're loud.
Yeah, they're not
There's an
different.
emphasis on conflict.
Yeah, not different. I mean, I think that what I've tried to do, there's a lot of people who position themselves. I mean, Patrick Bet-David is a good example of someone who's a bit more like me. He doesn't really take an ideological right or left position on everything. He's quite surprising. Joe Rogan's the same. That's why I really like listening to these guys. I don't like to box myself into left or right. You know, I'm very happy to appear on Fox, where they stick me in the Liberal chair sometimes on the 5 and so on. And sometimes I agree with them and sometimes I don't. But I don't like to be that. I like to be almost like a ringmaster where I'm, you know, challenging everybody. So I'll get people on in Israel-Hamas war. I'll get very big followed people on from the Palestinian side, from Israeli side, put them together or go after them one-on-one and just challenge them all. And people like that. And I said, look, we're called Uncensored. We're going to get everybody on. I'm going to give them all a hard time. And we'll see where we get to. But the viewer should benefit from just hearing all the views. And I think that is the way forward for someone like me. And I love that. The tabloids, in a way, it was sort of the same kind of aggressive treatment. You'd have the headlines. You know, of course, you're going to promote conflict, all those things. But you're still quite heavily regulated in newspapers, particularly in the UK, particularly by the end. And you don't have that with YouTube. It's far more free-ranging. Yeah. You know, you can just really be quite liberated. And just say, come on, let's just have a big open debate. What do you think? What do you think? Say what you like, spit it out. Let's have that debate. However mad your idea is, let's hear it. And if I think it's mad, I'll tell you I think it's mad.
Your show really has, I think, leaned in hard to these debates. You have on these major YouTubers. Some of them can be quite extreme on either side of whatever issue you're debating. Do you worry sometimes that, because the criticism, I'm sure you've seen it, is sometimes you're just platforming trolls. Is that something you're wary of? Do you have
I don't like platforming stupid people.
Okay.
And we've had a few times where I've said,
people that you're never going to invite back on.
Yeah, I've had a few people on. I said to the team afterwards, that's just like circus television.
Yeah.
I'm not interested in that. What I do like is smart people who are very passionate. Smart, angry, passionate people. That's fine, as long as they're smart and they have a position they can genuinely articulate and defend and robustly argue. That's fine. I don't mind it getting heated. You know, I had a great debate this on Monday. We had Sarah Palin, Mehdi Hassan, Dave Smith, and Destiny. I mean, the idea you could get those four together anyway was pretty miraculous, and it was just very heated, but it was actually very interesting. And we got some really great feedback to it. That's, to me, a dream kind of panel. But in terms of my criteria, the team will tell you, just no dummies. The dummy act doesn't work. It's just like, why am I watching a stupid person? I won't name names because it's a bit cruel to do that. But we've had a few people we've tried out and they're just a bit too stupid. Yeah. And it's like, well, I think our audience are pretty smart. They want to have smart debate. They want to see the verbal punch-ups if it's appropriate. But today we had a very much more nuanced debate between some people, which is airing tonight, which was a very different vibe going on. And I like that too in the mix. You know, and I like to then go and interview Kevin Spacey for 2 hours or Armie Hammer and people who've been cancelled and have those interviews. Or I want to go and do different kinds of stuff. So there's no like set rules. Not like we sit there and go, how can we get the most incendiary debates in the world? What I do like is having people with big followings, because in the YouTube world, there's a kind of zeitgeist which then blows up, where they're all promoting their own stuff. Like everyone on that debate yesterday, they're all doing their own thing, and that generates a lot of interest, a lot of heat, and that will generate a lot of eyeballs. And ultimately, I mean, here's a similarity with newspapers. People will say, you're just doing that to sell newspapers. I went, well, yes, it's literally my job, right? And then they say, you're just doing that for clicks. Yes, I want clicks. That is my job, is to get people to watch. Right. But actually, the type of click I want is a clip where I see the average watch time over 20 minutes. Because if you're doing that consistently, as we are, then people are sitting there and they're properly getting into it. I don't want to see them clicking off after a minute. I want a 20-minute average minimum, and off we go. And you sit there and you feel at the end of it, well, I heard a lot of opinions there and I'm slightly better informed. That's the sweet spot for me.
It's interesting because I don't think there's another medium in journalism that works like that, where it's this network of people with these massive subscriber bases, and they're all having each other on their shows for debates and for conversations and stuff to promote their own shows. Of that universe, who do you admire the most and who do you admire the least?
I've got a lot of admiration for people like Jordan Peterson, Ben Shapiro.
Bit odd, Jordan Peterson, no?
I like him a lot.
He cries a lot.
He's an emotional guy.
Yeah.
He's cried on my show a few times, yeah.
What did he cry about?
You cried about the state of young men who feel completely disenfranchised from society. It genuinely
moved him to tears.
Yeah. And I've got a lot of time for Jordan. I think he's one of the smartest thinkers out there. I've got a lot of time for the Daily Wire guys. I think the way they built that business.
They've built a media company that is
it's an amazing
serious.
business. I've got a lot of time for you guys, right? I like what you guys do. I do.
Appreciate it.
And it's nice to come here and see how you do it because I'm very invested now in trying to work out the best way for me to go.
Yeah.
I think all those guys, I think last night, Mehdi Hassam, we don't agree about a lot of stuff. Almost nothing, in fact. But I like having him on, and I like the way he's gone out now.
And Zateo is a very smart media business.
Very smart, and he's a smart guy, and he argues himself. He interviewed me for his own podcast, and he gave me a good old skewering, and it was good. And I like that because actually, if you're going to do what I do, you need to be skewered a few times about your own changing positions and explain, as you've done, about how could I say that about Trump? He did the same thing. I need to think about that. I need to answer to myself my changing positions. But I would say generally that I've become a lot less intransigent than I used to be. One of the things about being a tabloid editor is everything's black and white. Bang!
Yeah.
Here's my view, right? And I used to be like that on Twitter for a long time. I'm a little bit more nuanced now. I'm a little bit more, oh, that's interesting. Okay, maybe I've changed my mind. I never used to be like that. And I think we need a lot more of that in our society, where you can have a robust exchange and at the end concede points. It's how you get to resolution on things.
Now, speaking of the business of Piers Morgan Uncensored,
Megyn Kelly I'd put in the
admire.
Megan's
you didn't tell me who you admire the least.
Let me think about that. But Megyn Kelly, I'm a big fan of. I mean, a guy called Steve Krakow who worked with me.
Yeah, producer. Yeah,
he was with me at doing my digital at my CNN show, and he helps Megyn run that. I think they're a very successful setup. I think it's very smart. And I've looked at people like Tucker and what they're doing. A lot of them are far more conservative than I am, or in Mehdi's case, far more left-wing than I probably would feel comfortable being. But I look at the way they run their businesses, and I think this is the future for a lot of big opinion people. This is the way it's all beginning to go. And I think that in 10 years' time, people will look back at this particular period, and hopefully they'll look at people like me and Mehdi and Megyn and Tucker and all these people and Jordan and Ben and everyone, and they'll think, yeah, they were at the start of this. And actually, this is the way young people actually want to consume content.
Right. Speaking of the business, if I have this correctly, you're under contract with News Corp, and then in addition to that, you own part of Piers Morgan Uncensored?
I own the name, the title.
You own the name, okay.
I own the name, yeah.
How much money are you making from the News Corp contract?
I nearly told you.
Fuck, I was close.
You nearly had me.
Almost had you. I figured if I spoke fast enough, you might slip. Let it slip.
You're not gonna, yeah. No.
It's going well though.
I think it's great. Yeah, I mean, I think that it's been an interesting kind of roller coaster trying to work out what's working and what isn't working, whatever. Personally, as part of the overarching deal, I've loved, for example, doing columns in the New York Post, columns in the Sun every week as well, but the biggest tabloid in the UK. I've got a book with HarperCollins we're working on. The last one was a big #1 bestseller. I've been doing crime documentaries for Fox Nation. But ultimately, the most successful thing of all of it came out of the wreckage slightly of the linear version on Talk TV, which I would love to have seen work better, but it didn't. But I think making that decision to move fully digital was the best thing we could have possibly done. And now we have, indisputably, one of the biggest news opinion YouTube channels in the world.
Yeah.
And when I speak to these other guys like Mehdi and Dave Smith and others, they're all like, wow, your numbers are like insane. And they are. And the good thing about YouTube, you can't hide it. It's all there.
Right.
People can just click on the YouTube
it's not
channel.
Nielsen numbers.
They can see all the numbers. You can see exactly how many are watching, how long they're watching for, and people can do the maths themselves, and they can see a proper business building. And I find that very exciting. And I think that I've looked at people like Daily Wire and Ben in particular, but also Jordan and others, Matt Walsh and others, and Megyn started doing it. When you add things like live shows, you add, as The Wire have done, a books division, a documentary division. I mean, merchandise. Some great stories out of Daily Wire about how advertisers were mucking them around, so they did their own hair gel.
Yeah.
And suddenly they're making millions.
Moved into Tucker Carlson's also moving into products.
Right, which is very interesting. It's like you're basically in the opinion brand business.
Yeah.
And I'm a newcomer to that in terms of YouTube, but I've been very excited by the speed of the growth. And my next logical move is to then take it into all those other areas.
Right. Have you spoken to Rupert Murdoch recently, and do you have a sense of what the future of the Murdoch media empire is?
I have not.
Okay. Do you have a sense of what the future is?
You'd have to ask him.
Okay, interesting. If the Murdochs called you up and said that we want you to host a show on Fox News, would you do it?
I'd always listen to the Murdochs when they call me.
Okay.
I've got massive admiration for the Murdochs.
Yeah.
And obviously I've known Rupert since he made me editor of the News of the World back in 1994. So we've known each other 30 years. And I've got massive respect and admiration for him. But as to what his plans are, you'd have to ask him. One thing about Rupert, he's always surprising.
Yeah.
He's always got stuff on the go. And that's what makes him invigorating to work for.
Fox News, the last election, obviously we have the election in a couple days. The last election, they had some trouble covering it. Obviously, there was the early Arizona call that caused a lot of controversy with the viewers. There were the Trump's claims of a stolen election, which obviously was a big problem for them in lawsuits. How do you think Fox is going to cover this election? Do you think the network is going to be more reserved? Do you think they've figured out how to cover this without falling into the traps that they did in 2020?
I honestly don't know the answer to that. You'd have to ask Suzanne Scott and the others that run Fox News. I think that from my point of view, what I will say to people about Fox News is that they know where I am politically. I'm kind of, Bill Maher, really, in terms of where I am. But I go on Fox a lot and do a lot of the shows. They put me on The Five. I go on Gutfeld. I go on all these things. And they're very good to me. They let me just say what I want to say. No one's ever said to me, you've got to toe the line or say this line or this line. There's a little bit of mythology about that. I mean, Fox has the opinion hosts in prime time. But if you look at Brett Baer, for example, he's one of the best straight news anchors in the world, right? And they have a lot of people like that there as well. So they have a mixture of very strong, I would say very robustly impartial news anchors, and then they have people who are unashamedly opinionated. Well, I think there's nothing wrong with that. I look at MSNBC. I think they're far more biased, actually, in totality than I see at Fox. They will laugh when they hear that, but I watch them and think, And then I look at CNN where I used to work, and a lot of them are unashamedly MSNBC-like. I mean, I had to laugh when I saw Anderson Cooper banging on about how impartial he is the other day. Really, Anderson? You think you're impartial, mate? Really? You think in Trump's presidency you took a really robustly impartial line for 4 years? Because I seem to remember you running with the old Russia collusion thing pretty damn heavily. So a little bit of a charlatan, Mr. Cooper, I'm afraid. I felt that what the Trump era did was it exposed a lot of prejudices, right? And this sort of thing that a lot of mainstream media in America is extremely liberal skewed is true. There are lots of people I love at CNN, by the way, so it's not a curse on all of them. But there are some of them, and Anderson's a prime example where you could not watch him for very long and not in that period think, well, he's obviously in the tank against Trump, right? And I don't think they should be. And I kind of agree with what Jeff Bezos has written in the Washington Post defending their thing not to come out. I mean, in the end, why would you want a newspaper like the Washington Post to declare their colors yet again for the Democrat candidate? Yeah. All it does is tell the world you're a Democrat newspaper. Same with the New York Times, same with the LA Times, USA Today today. So I actually, well, New York Times is obviously endorsing, but the others aren't. I think it's good that they don't, actually, because you've got to at least pretend to be impartial. Yeah. And to say you are, but to then just always endorse a Democrat candidate, that's not impartiality. Sorry, guys. Yeah. You're in the tank for liberals. And that's fine. I'm one of them. But I don't think it works. The act doesn't fly anymore, and people have got other choices. They can come elsewhere out of legacy media. And I think when you've got people like Trump and you've got Elon Musk and all these guys on their case all the time now, exposing it when it comes out, you got to look at it and go, yeah, I'm afraid that game is over. So you may as well all just come out and just show your true colours. I used to think that CNN could all just be much more opinionated. Yeah. Just come out, let us know what you really think. I mean, tell us.
Speaking of CNN, I don't know if you ever overlapped with Sir Mark Thompson, the news.
I know Mark. Yeah.
Know Mark?
Yeah.
He had a storied career at, I think, Channel 4 before he was at the BBC.
Yeah, and he did very well at the BBC. He did very well at the New York Times. Yep. He's a very smart guy.
Are you optimistic that he will be able to turn around?
I've had a lot of CNNers ask me, "What do you know about Mark Thompson?" I mean, I've always gotten very well with Mark. I think he's a very.
They ask you how to navigate.
Yeah, but I've never worked for him, so I've sat next to him at dinners and had fun with him and stuff. I mean, he's a very smart, thoughtful guy who worked it out at the New York Times very well and made it a rip-roaring digital-led success. It was brilliant. And I think he'll probably do the same at CNN. It's probably a harder ship to turn around, but I think he'll probably get there. I would have every confidence if I was CNN that he will get there eventually, because he's a smart guy who's got a proven track record, and they need that. I mean, look, I love CNN, but I like CNN more when it was kind of less censorious and less worthy and less virtue signaling.
Right.
It should all lighten up a bit.
You want them to have more fun.
I used to have a lot of fun at CNN.
Yeah.
You know, when I was doing that, I remember some of the interviews we did were hilarious. And I'm not sure how often I see that. They've got some brilliant people. I love Caitlin Collins. I love Jake Tapper, Erin Burnett. These are all people I really admire. Wolf, obviously, John King, The Machine. I mean, there's Dana Bash. I think they're all great. But they could all lighten up a bit. Have more fun.
Who are you going to
always have to be serious. You don't have to always put that. They put that sort of pensive face on, you know. Trump, get over yourselves, have a laugh. What the one thing is when Trump says something obviously funny, and they're all pretending they're not finding it funny. It's like, just laugh, it's fine. No one's going to shoot you, right? They might shoot him, but they're not going to shoot you. So just take the stick out of your ass and laugh.
Who are you going to be watching and reading on election night?
I'm very interested in what my old producer Jonathan Walder's doing with Brian Williams.
With Brian Williams.
And I saw
Amazon.
Abby Huntsman's joined in. I've seen today is going to be who I always had on at my CNN show. I think she's great. I think that's a really interesting thing to see how that works. I'm watching it with particular interest because if those streamers start getting into news and opinion, hallelujah.
Yeah.
So I think I always think Brian's a really great operator. Jonathan Wall's a very smart guy. And I think it's a very interesting new thing to watch. So I'll definitely be watching a bit of that. I'm doing a bit for the BBC in the UK. Probably, I'm sure I'll do a bit for Fox on the day and the days around it. Doing my own stuff, obviously. Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I mean, it's curious because in England, you normally know pretty quickly by 10 in the evening who's won. Here, I remember last time it was like 4 days. It could be longer.
Right, we're going to be counting ballots in Anchorage.
Yeah, so it's kind of like, it's a bit like, watching a football match when you have to wait for the sort of the video assisted referee to give you a verdict days later. So it's going to be fascinating. I mean, my personal gut feeling, and I might look very silly within a few days of this, but I think Trump could win quite big.
Really?
I think just anecdotally, I was in LA recently. I was struck by the number of people who were very openly prepared to say they're voting Trump.
Far more than I think in 2016.
Way more.
Are not ashamed about saying that they would vote for Trump.
And I feel it in New York. I've had a lot of people come up to me who know I know Trump, and that visceral hostility is just not there.
Yeah.
And when I saw the lack of protests at the Madison Square Garden, I was like, yeah, you're all talking a good game about this is the new Hitler. You don't mean it. You don't believe it, or you'd be here trying to stop the new Hitler, but you're not. So he's kind of beaten them. No, I might be wrong, and maybe Kamala Harris could pull it off. I think she's a very weak candidate, and the more that we've seen and heard of her, the weaker she sounds and comes across. And Trump is Trump, and people are kind of factored in what they think of him.
Are you worried about anything on election night, whether it's violence on either side? Obviously we had January 6th the last time, or Trump claiming victory before the vote is called. Is anything?
I'm sure a lot of that's going to go on.
Yeah,
I'm sure. I don't think there'll be violence, and I hope there isn't. I do think America looked at itself very hard after January 6th and was like, this is such a terrible look. Someone who loves America and loves Americans, I was like...
That's what I was thinking, what the world would think watching that.
I don't think you can't have that again. And I'm sure Trump would not be party to that again. I think he wouldn't admit this publicly, but he must have been utterly horrified by the scenes. It was awful. So I think that I hope and pray there's no violence. There was nothing going on at Madison Square Garden, and that in a way encouraged me. So I just think, look, democracies are built on people having spirited, passionate debate. But at the end of it, in the UK, we go to our pub and we have a pint together or a cup of tea. I think America needs to get back to that, where America actually, at its heart, is a very unified country. It's just been very fractured. And I think social media has a lot to do with it. It's inflamed people into taking tribal, toxic positions and then refusing to change their mind when the new facts present themselves and stuff. I just think everyone should take a massive chill pill. All right, the world is not going to end if Donald Trump becomes president again. It didn't end last time. It's not going to end this time. And similarly, if Kamala Harris wins, it's not going to be the end of the world. America is a magnificent country. And I hope whoever wins does then use it as a platform to make the country more unified. I think most Americans want that.
My last question. One through line in your career is that you're a survivor. You were named top editor of News of the World at 28, I think, in 1994. And you had a series of enormous successes, big failures throughout the years. And you barreled through all of those obstacles, and now you're probably one of the most, enduring and successful journalists in the world. What advice would you give people in the industry about success and about survival?
I have a count to 10 strategy, whatever it is, if it's professional, not personal, because it's different. Yeah, personal blows, losses is a much more difficult thing to deal with often. But professionally, just count to 10, whatever it is. I found that I think that Winston Churchill had the best line, which is that real success is going from failure to failure with no loss of enthusiasm. And I knew what he meant, which is like, I mean, a lot of things that people perceive were failures for me were actually, in my opinion, big successes. Like, I only did like just under 4 years at CNN, but that's 4 years more than any other British anchor's ever done at CNN. And I was,
that's a nice way to look at it.
I did 1,100 shows. I interviewed some of the biggest names in the world. I did pretty much everyone I wanted to do, and then sailed off into the sunset because people didn't like my views about gun control. Okay, I get it. And then I went to a breakfast show, and then people remember how I left, walking off on that infamous day for not believing Meghan Markle. Now I'd be fired for believing Meghan Markle. So I think time has tested well on that one. But again, I took it, we finally beat the BBC in the ratings that week for the first time ever, and probably the only time ever. And I'd reached the summit, really, and planted the flag, done 5 years. My body couldn't have got up at 4 a.m. anymore. I was kidding me. And move on. The talent shows, I love them. America's Got Talent, amazing experience. Britain's Got Talent, #1 shows in their countries for years. Loved that. Celebrity Apprentice. I would never have met Donald Trump if I hadn't done that. And to be a friend, albeit warts and all, good and bad, good times, bad times, with someone like Trump is fascinating. And to watch the way his political career started and then crashed and has now come back again. Amazing. So I look at all these things and I think all the things that other people thought were maybe down moments for me, they were fine. Even when I left the Daily Mirror newspaper after 10 years, I was ready to go. Yeah. I had itchy feet. I was ready to move on. And I think count to 10. Whatever the problem is, if I've had little things, big things, I just go deep breath. 1. Okay, we're good. And then move on. Don't look back. Don't worry about looking back. Just move on. Positivity. And just let people say what they want to say. And remember that very little of it sticks. I mean, people, I could do a greatest hits of good and bad things in my media career, but I'm still here. I'm still having a great time, and I'm doing this, and I love the media jungle. I love the world, and I want to keep testing myself and challenging myself and doing new exciting things. But I'm sure I'll crash and burn again a few times, and then one day the Grim Reaper will knock on my door, and I'll make my final crash and burn in a crematorium somewhere. So you got to put things in perspective.
There you go. Piers Morgan, thanks so much for coming on Press Club.
Good to see you.
Appreciate it.